The best of Money Matters. The Big Story.
Welcome to The Big Story. I'm Hongbin Jeong. A historic day for peace. That's what Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have called it, as they unveiled a 20-point plan that would end the war in Gaza. But that's if Hamas accepts within 72 hours. The plan presents Hamas with a bitter trade-off, demanding that the group effectively surrender in return for uncertain gains. The proposal excludes Hamas from governance, sets up a technocratic Palestinian committee, creating a board of peace chaired by Trump with global figures involved. Several Muslim nations have backed it, but many Palestinians on the ground remain deeply skeptical. So what does this plan entail, and how realistic is it? Well, joining us today is Dr. Stephen Hoadley, who is a retired professor of international relations at the University of Auckland. Hi, Dr. Hoadley. Welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Nice to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Dr. Hoadley, what does this 20-point plan entail?
Well, look, it's quite long, but it's basically only the same 5 points that Israel has been putting forward since October the 7th. Disarmament of Hamas, the removal of Hamas as a governing agent in the Gaza Strip, return of all the hostages, and making sure that Gaza never becomes a security threat to Israel again. So in many respects, the 20 points are simply an expanded version with a little bit of methodology of the original 5 points that Israel wanted. There are a couple of new wrinkles. We can talk about those in a moment, but the 20 points are available to your listeners on BBC, CNN, all the major news agencies will reproduce them, and it's worth having a look at them just to see where we stand at this point, this historic moment in time.
Right. Well, U.S. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have cast this as a historic day for peace. But is it really? How are other nations viewing this agreement?
Well, let's take these questions one at a time. It's a historic day for peace proposals. That is, peace has not broken out. The Israelis are continuing, as we speak, military offensive against Hamas positions in Gaza. Hamas has not responded to the proposal by Trump and the others, so peace is still not achieved. So it's not historic just yet. It's premature. Nevertheless, a number of Gulf states, your neighbor Indonesia, Pakistan, the majority of the Sunni Muslim world has praised this peace plan and endorsed it in a joint statement. So to that extent, it's historic that the majority of the Sunni Muslim world, not the Shia Muslim world, has endorsed the plan, come in behind President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and all the others who helped to negotiate this, such as Egypt and Qatar.
Right. Well, in the latest news as well, Singapore also welcomed this plan. And in a statement, the MFA spokesperson said that Singapore has called on Hamas to accept the proposal to end the war in Gaza. Now, Hamas said, ahead of this Trump-Netanyahu meeting that it had not yet seen the plan and would need to study the proposal. But then how can Trump and Netanyahu move forward and agree with the plan involving Gaza without really involving Hamas in initial talks, Doctor?
I think you imply that it's unwise to move too far ahead without consulting a major player in the situation. Certainly, Trump can propose anything he wishes. He's a leader of a sovereign country. Netanyahu, likewise. But to be really effective, say, the way that President Carter and President Clinton in the past have made breakthroughs in the Middle East after careful negotiation, after bringing all the parties online, working out the details in advance, and then there's an announcement. Trump likes to do things the other way around. He likes to have big announcements, and then he lets other people work out the details. He claims he's resolved 7 wars, which he has not. So we see this is a typical way in which President Trump operates, very different to traditional, effective, careful diplomacy.
Well, attention now is on Hamas because Hamas has to accept this proposal and they've got 72 hours to do so. And Trump has warned that if Hamas rejects the deal, then Netanyahu would have the U.S.'s full backing to destroy the militant group. But, Hamas looks like it's left with not a better, but a bitter trade-off, demanding that the group effectively surrender in return for uncertain gains. So how likely is Hamas going to accept this deal, Doctor?
Well, you're right. You and I are rational negotiators, and if we were in Hamas' position, we would accept the offer of amnesty. We would accept the offer of safe passage to another friendly country that would look after us. We would realize that the war is lost, but the Hamas people are ideologues. They are martyrs. They believe, not like you and I, that life is precious, but rather life should be sacrificed for jihad. And consequently, they are prepared to fight to the death. And that's their logic quite different to ours. So the chances of them accepting this proposal, giving up the hostages, which is their strong suit in this exchange of threats and opportunities, and surrendering their arms, at this point, I think is very small. They're not going to accept they have totally lost, because that would then violate their commitment to jihad, to their commitment to Iran, their sponsor in funding weapons and leadership. They would have no future. They would be dishonored. And consequently, I'm very doubtful that Hamas will do what you and I would do, realizing we had lost the war decisively, and make an honorable peace. I'm sure the Hamas people have a very different mindset. They've been fighting Israel for 20 years, been now given 72 hours to make up their minds. We don't know what their leadership structure looks like. They might be fragmented and hiding out in tunnels, not able even to convene a leadership meeting. They are being directed by the leaders in Qatar, and we don't know what they're thinking. And can they communicate effectively with their fighters in Gaza itself? So I'm very doubtful that 72 hours from now, we will find a release of hostages, a surrender of the Hamas fighters, and end of the fighting.
So in a sense, if, Hamas accepts this deal, would this be them admitting defeat?
Yes, indeed. I mean, we all hope that they will. I mean, we in the West, we would like this war to end. The Israelis have said we'll stop all military action immediately if Hamas indicates that they'll release the hostages. And this is what we all want. This is what the Sunni Muslim countries want. Your neighbor, Indonesia, your government, Singapore, want. We all want this, and New Zealand's position and Singapore's position, by the way, are very close. Neither of us recognizes a Palestinian state. Both of our governments put conditions on that would reform Palestinian Authority, that would require the hostages to be returned, that Hamas would disarm. So before we would recognize a Palestinian state. So we have, I think, a sound position that's been reiterated over the course of this war, and Hamas just sees the world in such different terms, in ideological terms, in jihadist terms, that it just seems unlikely that they will, at this point, do what we would think would be the logical thing: surrender with honor and accept amnesty and safe passage to a friendly country, and maybe integration into a new Gaza administration as peaceful participants rather than as militant fighters. But I'm pessimistic.
Well, if the proposal is accepted, what will be the fate of Gaza, though?
That's such a good question. The 20 points actually introduce a whole new concept, which is called something like a board of peace. There will be an international security force will come into Gaza. It will accept the surrender of Hamas if they surrender. It will disarm the various other armed groups. There's some clans and some mafia groups that are armed as well. There's Islamic Jihad and some splinter groups. And this international force, hopefully composed of Israel and Gaza's Arab neighbors, would come in and take the disarmament. And they would be directed by this board of peace chaired by, Donald Trump. Well, this then makes the whole thing a little bit suspect, because Donald Trump is the world's greatest egotist and is erratic in his decision-making, often reverses himself. He has named one other person on this board, and that's Tony Blair. Tony Blair is the right-hand man to George Bush in the invasion of Iraq, discredited as a politician, now a millionaire slumlord in London with a poor reputation. It seems to me this is not a particularly good start for new government of Gaza. Now, eventually the Gazans would take over, and if the Palestinian Authority reforms itself, has an election, eliminates corruption, eliminates payment to terrorists, accepts Israel as a legitimate partner state, then the Palestinians could gradually take control of the Gaza Strip in coordination with the Palestinian Authority and the West Bank Gazans as well. This is what we're all hoping for. And then there will be an opening for a two-state solution. But that's a long way down the track.
Well, this board of peace, it looks like the board will be headed and chaired by Trump himself. So how credible is this idea of an international board overseeing Gaza and with Trump heading and chairing the board?
I think there'll be a lot of suspicion because Trump has disrupted the international trading system with his arbitrary tariffs. Trump has discredited international organizations. And by the way, one of the 20 points is that the United Nations would come in and administer aid to the Gazans. Well, this is great. This is what we all want. We don't want hunger in the area. I don't think there's starvation, but there might be hunger. But Trump is not a friendly figure when it comes to international cooperation, International Health Organization, or the World Trade Organization, or the United Nations. So with him, the head of this board, many governments are going to be suspicious that his erratic decision-making style will invalidate and create confusion in what should be a serious and step-by-step process of disarming Hamas and then empowering the Palestinians in a peaceful direction to take control of their own destiny. We have a suspicion that Trump views the Gaza Strip as a great real estate opportunity, that he wants to make it the Riviera of the Eastern Pacific, that he may want to invest, have Trump Tower and Trump golf courses there. And this is venal, this is greedy, and not really a dignified position for a U.S. president to take. And that kind of statements and behavior will invalidate in many leaders' minds the Trump leadership of this whole enterprise. So again, this is my own personal opinion, and I hope I'm wrong, and that he rises to the occasion and does preside over a serious step-by-step rehabilitation of Gaza, both the political rehabilitation and the physical rehabilitation of that entity. But again, I'm not too hopeful.
Okay. Well, could excluding Hamas from transitional governance as well also, provoke resistance?
Well, that's a good point in the sense that polls have consistently shown that a majority of Gazans celebrated the October 7th massacre of Israelis, continue to support Hamas, even though they've had no election since 2006, and they dislike Israel. So even if Hamas is removed, there'll be many, many people, the great majority of Palestinians will continue to harbor resentment and bitterness, and it's quite possible that Hamas-like organizations will spring up spontaneously. They might look like mafia. They might look like clan-based organizations or neighborhood organizations. They may get clandestine support from Iran again, and Iran has never denied that it supports the proxy armies and militia in the Middle East. And so it is quite possible that the Hamas situation will reproduce itself in the future, although the names and the people may change. The threat to Israel will recur.
Well, meanwhile, Netanyahu has stressed that Israel will retain a security responsibility in Gaza for the foreseeable future. Why is Israel insisting on retaining security control in Gaza? And if it continues to do so, can genuine Palestinian self-governance ever take root?
Well, that's the point. Can Hamas and other radical leaders be separated from the population? And are there alternative leaders who are of a more peaceful, less jihadist, less anti-Israel posture that can rise to the occasion and lead a legitimate government? Now, we have a few examples. Northern Ireland would be one in which vicious Catholic-Protestant conflict gave way to a political conflict. The militia can transform themselves into political parties, and now there's peace in Northern Ireland. Well, this is what we hope will happen in Gaza, that responsible leaders will come forward, the Israelis will recognize them, the Israelis, the Arab countries will train up police and other security and administrative officials to provide the basic services the infrastructure services, and that over a period of time, a new Gaza will occur, a peaceful, tolerant Gaza, one in which can live along with the Palestinian Authority that also has to be reformed similarly, live in peace with Israel. Now, if that happens, we will all applaud, and we will say, all right, Donald Trump deserves his Nobel Peace Prize. But again, we're talking not 5 weeks or 5 months, we're talking 5 years. We may be talking decades to allow all of this to evolve and for a whole new ideology to arise in Gaza that guides the Gazans to the conclusion that peaceful cooperation with Israel is better for them, but better materially for them, better for their peace, better for their children, and that they have been led astray by the Gaza jihadist attacks on Israel, and that this was a terrible mistake. And if they can free themselves from this historical burden which has been imposed on them partly by Iran, that then we do have an historic agreement. We do have an historic turning point. But in my view, the historic turning point is Israel's attack on Iran, on Hezbollah, on Hamas in Gaza, and posing a military peace. And that once these different anti-Israel groupings are suppressed, in fact, this will be the way to a new peaceful Middle East. And once all the terrorist groups are curbed, under control, they may still exist, but they may not be life-threatening, but only a nuisance like crime, then the Arab countries will all resolve their differences with Israel. They will engage in trade and exchanges of various kinds. And indeed, a post-Iran, post-militia, post-Hamas Middle East will be a miracle. And this is what the other alternative route that some people see is the way that is. Israel should continue the war until Hamas is totally destroyed, impose military rule on the Palestinians until Palestinians and Gazans reform themselves politically and keep Iran's nuclear program and other aggressive actions at a minimum. This is the route that many people see is the way to a new, transformed, prosperous, and peaceful Middle East.
Definitely. Well, before we look ahead to, 5 years or even 5 decades of what Gaza would look like, the next 72 hours will be crucial. So what will you be looking out for in the next 72 hours, Doctor?
Well, I think you and I will both be on the edge of our chairs waiting to see, will Hamas respond? First of all, will they respond at all? Secondly, will they accept all or part of the 20-part plan? They may come back and say, look, we'll accept point A, B, and C, but not point D, E, and F. Now, this will create then a diplomatic dilemma. Trump and Netanyahu have said, well, if they don't accept this 20-point peace plan, we will resume the war. We'll carry on doing exactly what we're doing right now, which is attacking the central Gaza City areas in which the remaining maybe 2,000 or 3,000 Hamas fighters are now holed up and in retreat. So I think that's what we're waiting to see. We're hoping that Hamas will come right back and say, we accept the whole thing, and the guns and the bombing will stop. The Israelis will halt in place. Hamas then will come out of their tunnels. They'll bring the hostages, dead and alive, out into the open. They'll surrender their weapons, and they will plea for amnesty or plea to relocate in Qatar or Iran or whichever country might accept them to start a new life. That's what we'll all be hoping for in the next 72 hours.
Some great analysis from you there. Thank you so much, Dr. Hoadley, for joining us today.
You're most welcome.
Thank you. That was Dr. Stephen Hoadley, retired professor of international relations at the University of Auckland. This has been The Big Story with me, Hongbin Jeong.
Money FM 89.3